I don't think that the Browns are fully to blame here. I don't think we need to, I don't definitively know Baker would be Baker here. I don't know. I just know that I think there are a lot of people protecting their own ass because they were helping drive Baker out of Cleveland 3 years ago and clinging to the idea of, the Browns wanted to change it, and that's okay. No, it's not, because neither change has worked for them.
No, they put themselves in this mess. There's no other way to look at it. They put themselves in this mess, and if Baker goes out, which is on the table, by the way, that Baker goes out and wins league MVP this year, the Browns have to own that. It's on them. There's no really rerouting that.
Yeah, but the problem is they don't. And what I mean by that is they still think they were right. The people who wear it are the people who support the team that supported Baker. I think that's the frustrating thing. I asked for none of this as a Browns fan.
Well, we just sat there the way that we have to as fans. We don't have a seat at the table. We just have to sit there and accept their decisions. If you just backtrack and highlight everything that went down, you'd say, wait a second. He was a Cleveland quarterback, and he won a playoff game
a year prior.
And then he played through an injured year the year after that, and then all of a sudden they were just done with him. Like think about if we had that situation happen right now, you'd think that the person was crazy. You think everyone involved, it was Looney Tunes. They lost their mind. And so that's the part that I find so interesting. When you try to rewrite it, when you try to really go back and figure out where the Browns were and where Baker took the Browns to, and then the idea that they just casted him aside. But it's the reality. It's how it went down.
A lot of it's just been, you need a quarterback. That is a quarterback. I think this team with that quarterback would be good enough to win a lot of football games and be very fun this year. And instead, I'm wondering when I get to see Dillon Gabriel potentially go out there and maybe push back my own expectations for him.
Well, I do wonder if this becomes a lesson in staying with the quarterback that you drafted or staying with the quarterback that you think there can be something there. I wonder if this is just that lesson that the Browns end up taking over with. But what is it going to be, another 3 years before Stefanski and company get a chance to even prove that they've learned that lesson? And more likely than not, they would prove they learned it with a different organization.
I'm here to say I don't think this organization learns lessons. They're still way too cocky and way too arrogant in their plan and the way they do things to learn their lesson. And I don't think this, by the way, I don't think this is a unique thing to just the Cleveland Browns or unique thing to Ivy Leaguers. I don't think they are capable of learning. Maybe this is just where we are now. This is an organization that really has just never fully addressed the fact that 5 years ago when they came into play, they had a lot of what you need to compete in the NFL. 2 years in, they made a huge change, and everything they've touched since then has turned to crap. But you can't say that because, I don't know, maybe Jimmy Haslam will wake up and realize that that's what happened.
And that's the problem, though. They got swept up in some of the stupid things that nobody cares about. Like, think about OBJ's dad highlighting missed throws from Baker on a YouTube video. It should not have been what tore this franchise apart, but it was so easy to tear apart, and they were able to do it. And it's just like, if you just take a step back, all they needed was a couple months to think about it and then really think about what their decisions are. But at that point, they'd already contacted Deshaun Watson. Baker had found out, he'd gotten pissed, and it was just a bridge too far.
The parallels between the Baker conversation and the Baltimore conversation are pretty simple. The Baker thing right now would not be anywhere near a problem if Deshaun Watson had lived up to his end of the bargain. If the Browns hadn't failed the Deshaun stuff and the Baker stuff, it just wouldn't hit the same. But yet, that can be true, and at the same time, you got to point out, no, they failed both.
Yeah, they continue to do things where they fail both. Yeah. It's almost impressive the amount of ways if you just did coin flips for all their big decisions in the past 25 years, they would end up on the wrong side of the coin flip every single time. It's incredible how wrong they get it consistently.
Yeah, and I think specific to the Baker thing, you and I even hate this. Like, I saw our buddy Meredith Kane tweeting about Baker Bros. Baker Bros just can't admit it wasn't going to work out here. It's like, if you think the only people left in Cleveland that think Baker either got hosed or the Browns screwed up by moving on from Baker, if you think the only people left in that is Baker Bros, no, that is a growing legion. Every single week this dude gets another win or a game-winning drive or people throws for 2-3 touchdowns. The growing consensus is not just Baker Bros. I self-identify as a Baker Bro. You do as well. But honestly, I always thought that was bunk. The idea that the only way you could think Baker Mayfield should still be the quarterback at any point in the last 3 years was you had to like Baker Mayfield, meaning like you only like him, you like him more than the Browns. I got to be honest with you, that implies Baker bashers, at which that was far more bountiful over the last 3 years.
The part that's confusing to me is the people that are like, well, Baker said it himself. He wasn't mature enough when he was in Cleveland. It's like, I promise you he would have got to a spot that he got to be as mature as he needed to be to complete passes and have success. Like, it was going to happen. The Browns just weren't patient. And at the time, they really believed that Baker Mayfield was somewhere between 10 to 15, where I think now in today's NFL, you're like, all right, 10 to 15, let's cook. Let's get a good roster around him. Let's figure that all out. And they looked at the division. They saw Burrow. They saw Lamar. And at the time, you know what the Steelers had. But it was even if that was a downward trend, it was still the back part of Ben Roethlisberger. And I think they just got scared. I think Andrew Berry got scared of the amount of really talented quarterbacks that were coming, and he didn't realize that not only could Baker have a chance to mature, but Baker himself could also get better in the process. And they bailed way too quickly.
Yeah, who's the adult in the room here? And by the way, Baker saying, because I think Ken tweeted something like that at me, and we're a couple of us in a conversation on Twitter. I'm not trying to big time Ken. I just honestly can't remember the exact order of things. But like Ken said something like, well, Baker said himself he needed to be humbled. Yeah, that's called the high road.
Yeah, that's all. And that's part of maturity, by the way, is him taking the high road, where there were times here in Cleveland where he wouldn't do that, but he would have always gotten there.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that Baker doesn't think that in a different world with different leadership, maybe if John Dorsey doesn't get whacked after 2019, or if Greg Williams continues on as a head coach in 2019 and beyond, doesn't mean Baker is like a fatalist.
Dorsey was going to take Baker to the grave. One thing I love about John Dorsey is that John Dorsey, he chose Baker and he was committed to Baker. And if they'd never gotten rid of John Dorsey, there's not a doubt in my mind that Baker Mayfield still would be the quarterback here and the Browns would be having a lot of success.
But I think it's a really lazy response. And this to me is where I think the Browns can learn from this. The laziest response in the world is, yeah, it's cool to see him thriving in Tampa, but he had to grow up first and it never would have worked here. You don't know that. And you're giving an organization that since they've parted with Baker Mayfield had a lost season. Literally, goes to Carolina, gets benched after like 6 games, ends up in L.A. He had a lost season. His career, he was Carson Wentz. He was on the outs.
Yeah.
And he still accomplished more in the last 2 years and 2 games in Tampa than you have in the 3 years combined.
I mean, again, just say it out loud. Browns quarterback wins playoff game, is, 2 minutes away from an AFC title game appearance, and then a year later, you're kicking him out the door? Think about how crazy that sounds.
And not
just like some patsy Browns quarterback that just happened to be there for the ride. Like, Baker was the reason the Browns were there.
And I'll tell you this, and it was something that came up with my buddy Jeff, who was over at my house today, and we were talking about this. We've been relatively quiet about Baker for a few reasons. One, I don't want to rub the Baker fans in town, not the Baker bros, because there's plenty of people who still like Baker. I've not wanted to rub their face in it. All right? Personally, I don't like to dwell on it either, because it didn't piss me off last night. I was so happy for Baker.
Well, it's just hard to ignore last night.
It's after the game that I get really pissed about.
It's just hard to ignore last night. He looked so good.
Third.
That was the most fun I've had watching a football game this season, by far.
Third, the people who refuse to admit that Baker has become something that they themselves and that the organization said he couldn't become, those people shouted us down.
Yeah, it was a day in, day out thing. And now listen,
you had it so much worse than me because you were here for the entirety of the Baker Wars. And I didn't get back till July of that year.
Kind of like the Shedeur situation. I don't help myself either. You know what I mean? Like when I swerve into it, we swerve into it. I didn't help myself, but that was tough. It was a day in, day out battle, and it did. It felt like so many people on the other side of that argument were just convinced he was always going to be somewhere between 10 to 15. And I think the Browns they'd walk on glass right now to have a quarterback that was somewhere between 10 to 15 in the NFL.
I will say, in hindsight, the Baker Wars better than the Watson Wars. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, well, because the Baker Wars, at least you could make a legitimate argument for either side, and it wasn't like it was basically settled in many ways, and it continues to not be settled. Whereas the Watson Wars, that's not only been settled, but also when we were having the Watson Wars, it was like 95% to 5% of people.
I will say, I think just because I don't think I've made this point with the Baker Wars here, is I think it's way more complicated than people want to give credit for. We mentioned the "we didn't draft you" side of this. We mentioned the "we don't want to pay you" side of this. We've mentioned Baker's own actions and how that complicated things. We've mentioned the availability of Deshaun Watson. And we still haven't touched the scope of this. What I find really, really, truly interesting is that there are people unwilling to move off the things they thought 3 years ago. And I think that is such a massive pass to a Browns organization who has not done enough. They've done some things, they've had some success, but they haven't had nearly enough success to just put it on Baker. And I think in doing so, I think there are a lot of people just avoiding saying this sentence, "I was wrong about Baker Mayfield."
You mean in the organization? Is that what you're asking?
I'm talking about people in the media. I'm talking about people within the Browns organization. Even in the stuff the Browns have leaked about Baker, it's always been to make him look bad, like he was the problem, and never at any point being like, privately, the Browns expressed that they realized they got some things wrong in this whole process.
I do think it was when Stefanski and Barry, when they lay their head down tonight, I think they thought of it as it's either us or him type thing. Like either we stay or Baker is the one that stays. But all three of us aren't staying is the point. And so I wonder if they just look at it as that's the cost of doing business. That's how we kept our job.
So I think I've espoused pretty clearly what I think the Browns need to learn out of this, which is your process isn't flawless yet, and I think you can be a little bit more humble in your failure. Instead of reacting to your own failure with more arrogance and more standoffishness and more "why are you asking me that kind of question?" Before we get to the calls here, what do you think the Browns can learn from the Baker, the entirety of the arc, and maybe if you want to throw in the Watson stuff there too?
No, I just think the biggest lesson has to be you got to give a quarterback more than 4 seasons before you make some declarative statement on what they can and cannot be. And I think you have to understand that even if you have a quarterback that's 10 to 15th, and that's kind of where the area that he was living in when he was at the final little stretch there, you have to give him a chance to not only get better, but then surround him with weapons. Don't just wave the white flag and think that's not going to be good enough and you're never going to get past anyone that matters in the AFC, because there's all sorts of teams that are accomplishing a lot with less quarterbacks than Baker Mayfield.
216-474-0092. Let's go with Tim in Cleveland. Tim, what can the Browns learn from the Baker Mayfield saga?
They should learn from our most hated organization, unfortunately, which is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's don't let talent walk off your team. We watched it with Joe Hayden. We let him go for free. They picked him up. He played wonderful for them for a few years. We let Baker go. That's biting us. They should have sat him down and said, "We get that you're upset, but it's our job to try and improve this team. You're going to play backup unless you prove to us that you're the better guy until we figure out what this experiment's going to be. But you signed a contract, so you're either going to retire or sit out, which are both nuclear options for you that aren't going to work. So sit down and shut up and do your job."
See, it's
That's
interesting.
what they should learn. You don't let talent walk out the door.
So I agree with and I thank you for the call there. I actually agree with the overarching opinion. I disagree with the tact that Tim suggested taking. I think there was a lot, and this is on both sides. This is where it is, both sides. I think there was a lack of trying to understand each other. I think Stefanski and Barry didn't understand the emotionalism of Baker Mayfield, and I think Baker plays with passion. Baker's an emotional guy, and he didn't understand the stoic read on it. And I do think, how they're set up, they're not the right group to look and see how a Baker Mayfield impacts an NFL team. I think that's fair.
They're just not. Like, I remember when we had Scott McClellan on and he was talking about Shedeur, and he's like, Shedeur reminds me of Baker in many ways. And he goes back to the Pied Piper bit with Hugh Jackson and everything, and now he just calls and everyone comes running to him. Like, part of their analytics and part of their models that they just miss is those type of things that you can't quantify in a box score, but when you look around and you rating, like he was everywhere he went, he was having success, and then all of a sudden the Browns just thought to themselves, well, it's hit a brick wall, it's not going to happen, and they didn't account for the idea that he does so many things outside of a box score that you can't quantify.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, I don't think anyone, and I'm going to throw myself here included, I don't think anyone has the 100% perfect read on the Baker situation. Because you're either not giving enough ownership to the Browns, you're either not giving enough ownership to Baker, not maybe factoring in some of the other things we've talked about. Like, I get so annoyed when people are like, Baker's in the perfect situation in Tampa. It's like he didn't walk into that. He walked in with no promise of a long-term job on a prove-it deal with a guy who had never been an offensive coordinator before in the ashes of Tom Brady's Buccaneers.
Yeah, a team that was signing a quarterback of Baker Mayfield's ilk at the time, which wasn't very high value.
And the only thing he really had going for him, he did have Mike Evans, he did have Chris Godwin. That offensive line was being rebuilt. That defense was being rebuilt. And then, by the way, at the end of that first year, his reward for that success was he got a new offensive coordinator who had also been a journeyman, who had never been a play caller at the NFL level before. And his reward for that was getting a new offensive coordinator who's never been a play caller before. I think because Browns fans are removed enough about it, removed from the coverage in Tampa Bay, I think it's easy because it's the NFC South. There's nothing easy about this. There isn't. It's the NFL, and no matter if it's the easiest division, you're still going out there, and you are still playing other teams around football.
Right.
So I just think there are several parts of this where it's like it has become so politicized that I just don't think people are going to change their minds on it, and I think it's silly because I think we have plenty of information on Baker's success versus